Welcome to the State of the Black Man's Mental Health, and I'm your host, Paige Benjamin of Getting My Cheese Back on My Cracker Foundation. And today we have an amazing conversation. And before we begin, I want to bring on my co-host and amazing friend, Dr. Mark T. Latta. Dr. Mark T. Latta, tell the people a little bit about yourself.
Good afternoon. I am Dr. Mark. I am glad to be on this podcast again with my friend, Mr. Benjamin over there, Brother Benjamin. It's a great time. I'm the CEO and founder of Elevated Black Man, a foundation that's built around Black men where we can come and talk and be open. And I'm a elevation man's coach, which means I look at accountability and wellness to create elevation. But I'm happy to be here on a great subject tonight.
So now tonight's subject is something very unique, right? It's around, lack of a better term, boundaries, expectations of people, of ourselves, and how we pretty much uphold them, right? Because I think, I used to be a person that was habitual at allowing people to cross my boundaries, right? There were occasions where, you know, I would purposely make myself feel small to not to like walk around eggshells so that people don't bother me or mess with me. But
Hmm.
as I grew older, I realized the importance of like putting up boundaries and even in relationships,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
boundaries within relationships are important because it is what tells the other person what you are willing and not willing to deal with. So I want you to kind of start tapping into, what let first of all, let's rephrase it in the way you presented it, right? So let's
Right.
cover the topic that you want to talk about. And like I
Okay.
said, for
Nope.
me, I think the biggest thing I took out of it was boundaries, but
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
that the smart guy in the room got more than that to say.
No, we're both smart in the room, but we're both not. So the boundaries, like you said, setting on that's very important because when we talk about boundaries itself, is about preserving your mental health overall and your overall well being. So what I wanted to talk about in the essence of boundaries is to actually go back to some of those things that are non-negotiables, what I call the life's non-negotiable, or
Mm.
add an S to it, because the non-negotiables we talk about, our beliefs, our practices, our values, and all those are very essential to our well-being, and that's one of the things I had to learn over time. Not only did I not have boundaries, I didn't have everything was negotiable. And when you find out you're doing that, you get yourself in trouble because you start pleasing everybody but yourself. And the non-negotiables can vary from person to person, but often they include an aspect of over your overall self-care, and we can't forget that when we talk about healthy relationships, as you just said, when you talk about career goals or even personal growth, sometimes not having any negotiable ability for yourself, then that leaves you set for all other people. So some of the examples, like for me, now that again, elevated black man, my foundation, the pillars of health, which are mental, emotional, physical, social, and spiritual, to me, those are my non-negotiables. And some would say, well, what about your family? What about your personal life? Well, if I think I keep those five things intact, or at least three out of the five at all times, then that keeps me as a healthy, mentally healthy, and physical healthy person, so that I don't overlook my work, my job, my friends. So those are the non-negotiables for me: my mental, my emotional, my physical, my social, and my spiritual health. But some of the other examples that I know a lot of people have, regular exercise. Brother Benjamin, you've been on what, 8 or 9 days right now
Yeah,
on
day
working out?
9, and whoo, look at them guns. Get it.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah, and not to call you out, but why is it so important that you're on 9 days now? And the only thing I can guess is somewhere you fell off, which means it was negotiable with something.
Well, yeah, and I mean, let's take it a couple of steps back, right? And I think you hit it on the mark. As we get older, we start to identify what some of our values are, what some of our
Yeah.
core values are, right? Part of
Hmm.
identifying what are negotiable and non-negotiable are things that we feel as though are true to our core. And I think up until seeking therapy, I really wasn't sure, right? I felt like I was constantly in the dark, just appeasing people and not having
That's
people
huge.
in like mad at me or not having people feel some type of way around me.
Mhm.
As a younger kid, I was I was bullied, made fun of for many different things. And
Hmm.
I think those situations made me feel small. And as it continued to happen, I just became smaller and smaller and didn't really have anything to say stand on or defend
Hmm.
for myself. So as I got older and, as we start going through different eras in our life. So you talking about from elementary school to middle school. Once again, I'm gonna go back to my upbringing. Growing up in New
Hmm.
York in the '80s was kind of difficult, right? I'm West Indian descent, Haitian to be specific. Y'all see that flag? But being
Hmm.
Haitian in the '80s was like almost like being African in the '80s, right? Kids are mean as hell, and kids are mean as hell because adults are mean as hell. So
Yeah.
kids are only repeating what they hear adults hear. So what do I hear? You're Haitian, so you're an African booty scratcher. You're Haitian, so
Mhm.
you do voodoo. You're Haitian,
Right.
you eat this, that, and the other, right? So
Correct.
not knowing how to defend that, a lot of times I would just revert to being small or to feel like, what can I do to not be seen,
Right.
right?
Right. Okay.
You transgress into high school, to middle school, and high school. Middle school was even worse, right?
Yeah.
You talking about Brooklyn in the '90s, talking about the rise of crack, right?
Right.
Drug gang warfare at its highest. You are traversing the concrete jungle and hoping that, one, you're not wearing the wrong colors, right? And two, you don't go into the wrong block, right? So now as a young kid, I have all these things that I have to worry about.
Hmm.
In addition to fitting in school, being smart, and it didn't help that my reading comprehension was also not the greatest. So I had a
Correct.
whole lot coming down on me at such a young age. You know
Correct.
what I mean?
Leading to the
Um,
negotiability.
so how do I negotiate something that have I'm already behind the eight ball? Like, I can't
Mhm.
negotiate my intelligence because if I read in front of the class, I'm stuttering or I read the wrong word within a line, right? How do I negotiate my heritage status when the masses, the social masses, feel as though that where we are from are probably lesser than anybody else, right? Not knowing what I know now, right? Knowing that we
Correct.
are the first Black republic, and there's so much pride to have had behind that.
Hmm.
Fast forward to high school. I think high school was the first time I started to kind of feel myself, start to realize um, what I was good at. Right? My IT skills were honed in through high school. Finding that one teacher that saw the talent in me, saw that this was something I excelled at.
Hmm.
Not even just that, for a kid that used to think he wasn't the smartest or he wasn't that smart, I was put in a lot of AP courses or advanced courses because, my math skills or my science skills were above the reading and writing aspect, right? Um, and then fast forward to college. You know, the best thing you could do is send your child to college to either crush their ego or to make them the person that they're going to be. Right?
Right.
It's a sink and
Right. Right.
swim environment. Right? You go up, it's a brand new canvas, so you don't have the preconceived notions from where you came from, and then you have the limitless colors that you can paint on the canvas. So me going
Hmm.
into campus, I remember first week on campus, I'm talking to upperclassmen, right? I'm talking to upperclassmen women and like, hey, what's going on? How you doing? And meanwhile, other upperclassmen boyfriend comes
Right.
comes in.
Right.
But I'm kind of getting to the crux of what I'm saying. It's not till I start to, one, seek certain organizations like the greatest one of on earth, the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, right?
Hmm.
Um, I didn't realize how the process of developing a man is so ingrained into what I needed, right?
Right.
I think
Right.
some of the closest people in my life are the bres, and it just happens to be people of like mind flock together, right?
That
Um,
makes a difference.
and so now, having had these experiences and look back, my core values have shifted, right?
Hmm.
Taking African American history classes in college, understanding the importance of being the first Black republic, understanding the importance of being Haitian in this country and how we've contributed. Now it's like talking bad about my heritage is a non-negotiable. You can't tell
Exactly.
me about me because, and no offense to anybody, and if it's triggering, hey, it is what it is. Some people don't know where they come from,
Right.
right?
Exactly. That's
You
huge.
know, and
Makes a big
and
difference.
and there's always been this battle of, oh, you Haitian, these problems don't impact you as much as it impact us. I'm like, but it does, because at the end of the
Hmm.
day, color is color, right? Whoever
Correct.
you feel as though the oppressor is sees me as a Black man. What does Haitian look like?
And you are
You know what I
representative.
mean?
That's huge. And if
So for
you
me,
negotiate that, you'll lose that.
exactly. So I started to have non-negotiables around my identity, right?
Okay.
One thing you're not going to do is call me something that I'm not. One thing you're
Exactly.
not going to do is to down talk me, right? I think, you know, uh, Chappelle says the Jews have this term of saying people be punching down on them, right? And that's one thing that I won't let people do is I won't let nobody punch down on me, whether it's from a heritage perspective, whether it's how I look, how I dress. I'm like, I appreciate who I am. And then to the other side of non-negotiables, relationships, right? I've learned the hard way. You don't go backwards. You don't go backwards. One of the things that, and this kind of goes to, let's define some of our non-negotiables, right?
Correct.
And
Correct.
across the different spectrums of who we are, because there are multiple parts to us. For me, in a relationship, I don't believe in breaks, right?
Hmm.
Now, there may be exceptions to the rule, right? You're married, so there's been a lifelong commitment. Maybe there's a need to kind of like, let's reset, let's figure things out. But if we ain't married and you talking about you want to take a break,
Hmm.
enjoy yourself. I also
Again, it's
don't
not
re
negotiable for
I've exactly, I've also chose not to rekindle something that's no longer there,
you.
right?
Okay.
Think about it, like you break up with somebody, whether it's a break or not, y'all broke up for a particular reason, and y'all broke up because it was you both were unable to resolve it,
Hmm.
right? And now you're coming back to an unresolved situation, and it becomes the thing that continues to be the center of the relationship. So
Correct.
for
Correct.
me, going back to a relationship that, lack of a better term, failed is non-negotiable. It's not happening. You know what I mean?
Good.
But those are just a few. I don't want to monopolize the time here.
No, that's okay, bro. You just it hit you, and you have had an opportunity to kind of define those for yourself, and that's the importance of this conversation. I think you've been blessed to make those, and just because those are non-negotiable for you doesn't mean it's for somebody else. We still have to be able to
Right.
define things for ourselves, and that's why identifying, your life non-negotiables have to be a priority, and the needs to make the choice so that you can align with your core values. And that's what you gave the examples of, some of the core values. And I started, I talked about the physical health, regular exercise. Balanced diet could be for some. I think that's important from a standpoint of, not eating fast food all the time, or if you know that you have certain health issues, a non-negotiable is the McDonald's hamburger. Nothing necessarily against it if it fits your budget or doesn't fit your budget, but you have to realize that that has to be balanced. For me, hobbies, that goes into that physical aspect I talk about. One of the things I did, like today, I'm tired today because one of my hobbies is cycling. And I did a little too much, but it still was a non-negotiable. I had to get that ride in today. And Paige, this is funny to me, man. One of the things I think right now is non-negotiable, and they always tell you to have it, is sleep. For so many years in my medical career, I was up at 6:30 every morning at the hospital by 7 or by 6:30. But right now, I love sleeping. I absolutely love sleeping. What I mean by sleep is the relaxation part, because for so many years, I never truly relaxed because some of my non-negotiable is eating well, having exercise, family time. So I still was constantly on the go, and to a certain degree now. So that relaxation piece. One of the things we've talked about on this podcast, and even with the brothers, self care is wealth, man. That is a non-negotiable. And I think of anything we probably talk about today from a mental health standpoint, I think if brothers have self care activities, it aligns itself naturally. You talk about relationships. If the female male relationship is not good, however your dating quality is, find meaningful relationships. That meaningful relationship to me doesn't necessarily have to be in a romantic way. You know, my friendship with you is very meaningful. So for
Hmm.
me, those type of relationships is a non-negotiable because, you know, when the girlfriend, boyfriend, wife type thing, you know, disrupts or you have a bad time, you still have someone else that you can talk to. Your therapist. You know, that's the main thing here. Mental health, black man. Your therapist should be non-negotiable. Absolutely non-negotiable. Regardless, somebody thinks you should have one, that you shouldn't have one, because all that comes into play when you start going to your personal goals, whether it be your career. We talk about professional development all the time. So I think that's huge. So then
Now,
that's talking about all that. Yeah.
now we talked about this earlier, right? And actually, this is what I started with because I think non-negotiable leads to things like boundaries and setting
Mhm.
expectations, right? Because I think for me, um, you know, when my wife and I first started dating, one of the things that I really wanted to make sure that was I understand what her expectations were for me.
Right.
And
Right.
for me, expectations are, they're not like concrete. They're not like this thing that can never be broken or can't be augmented, but they were more like these are my thoughts of how I feel our relationship will go,
Hmm.
which usually stems or has a foundation of what's negotiable and what's not. And
Exactly.
for me, I'm a huge advocate on setting clear expectations, right? Um, and it's one of those things where if it allows me to align how I work with you, deal with
Uh-huh.
you, and know that like my biggest one of my expectations is you check me, make sure like you follow up and be like, hey, you said you would do this, you're not doing this, so personal accountability, right? Like, because the
Yeah.
thing is, if we don't have accountability, then regardless of what it is that we do, whether we do have these non-negotiables, if you're saying it's a non-negotiable, but you're letting somebody else do this to you, then how strong is it really a non-negotiable,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So how how do you incorporate boundaries with your non-negotiable or expectations with your non-negotiables?
Yeah. So again, this is all new to me from a standpoint of, again, I talked about those pillars, and I'm vulnerably honest here. Again, I only recently start setting the non-negotiables because, again, I was always negotiable. And
Mhm.
just a reminder of it, you know, when we talk about, you know, practicing, you know, gratitude, mindfulness, things like that. But for me, like you just said, you got to be able to communicate your own needs first. Um, and setting those expectations clearly, regardless of whether it's going to hurt the person's feelings or not. And you have to be assertive about it. For me, I think the assertive part was what I would hold back on. I think I would say, "Oh, I would like this," or, you know, "This is time for that," and set the expectation. And I thought I was clear, but I wasn't assertive about it. And if you're not assertive, that allows time for it to be taken advantage. Great example. This past weekend on Sunday, it was one of my cross the finish line moments. It was like, yeah, celebrate myself.
Mhm.
You know, I'm not the best griller in the world, but I like grilling. I have people love when I
Mhm.
grill. You know, I don't make a living off of it, nor would I even try to, but I love getting on the grill. And I went somewhere with my wife. It was a great event, a pool party, and she kind of volunteered me for the grill. I'm like, hold up now. I got on my Jesus sandals and my shorts. I'm like, no,
You
I'm
were
not in a
ready.
grill.
You were dressed for it. That's why she assumed such.
I wasn't dressed for it because if I was dressed for it, I would have had the shoes on. I would have had the camouflage shorts. I would have had a torn T-shirt. I would have had the hat on backwards. I would have had my grill clothes on. This was my go out on Sunday. I'm going with you to somewhere. I was looking suave, man. What you talking about? But you know, again, I don't know how they prep the food. I don't know, and then it was hot. I'm like, no, I'm chilling. My
Mm.
aunt was in town. I'm like, and she apologized. She's like, oh, you know what? I'm sorry for volunteering you, and it was over with, and we moved on with life. But for me, I was so proud that I was able to say no. It was necessary for me to say no to protect my personal time, my space, my values. In that moment, my aunt was in town. We were going out with you. Normally, I would be cooking at the house, hanging out. I packed it up. So for me,
Mhm.
again, it's that assertiveness, being able to do that. That healthy boundary is not necessarily what's healthy for the other person. The healthy boundary is for you, and being able to
Yeah.
maintain that balance between, whether it be the personal aspect or the social aspect. Again, setting expectations clearly and being that assertive part. Probably some people may be assertive, but they're assertive on expectations that aren't clear. So for me, those three
Yeah.
things: you communicate your need, it has to be specific and clear, and you got to be assertive about it. And you have to be okay with reminding the person or persons when they cross that boundary, because again, that's what is the foundation for the non-negotiable. So
N-
to answer that question, that for me, that's what I've learned. I'm learning to do, because again, since I've set those negotiables, being my mental, emotional, physical, social, and spiritual, maybe not all of them will be aligned, but if I can set that as a non-negotiable for the most of them, I think I'm pretty safe, because I got to be assertive about it. I'm not letting you come into this space.
Yeah,
Not letting
because
you come.
I think we as men, and not just black men, just as men in general,
Yeah,
struggle with setting some of those boundaries, right? And for those that do, kudos to you. A lot of us have unhealthy ways of dealing or enforcing our boundaries.
yeah,
I know, as I mentioned earlier, I had zero boundaries. Like it was do whatever,
right.
okay, sure, no
Take advantage.
problem.
I'm
And
here.
you're miserable, right? You're miserable.
Yeah,
You're just letting them do what you want them to do, and it's not always in a romantic situation. It's just friendships, right? Yo, let me borrow $1. Let me borrow $50. Let me borrow your
right.
car. Let me do this. And there are times where you want to say no, but you feel guilty. I
Yeah.
think there are times when we are made to feel guilty for saying, and I think you said it right. We felt great to say no. And I once I
Like,
learned that it's okay to say no, I think things started to change for me. Now, granted, on the other side, receiving no was not always the best of responses, right? But
exactly.
but this is where, one of the things my wife and I do is when we meet other couples that are seemingly happy, right? I'm not gonna say just because you look happy, you are happy, but couples that are seemingly happy or couples that we kind of revere, we ask, what's the key to your happiness? What's the key to this
Mhm.
your successes thus far? And it comes down to communications, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Having non-negotiables, setting boundaries, and not communicating them is a disaster waiting to happen. Because
Oh yeah.
if we're not able to communicate how we feel about certain things, then we won't be able to let our partners know that, hey, this is a non-negotiable, this is a boundary, and I ask you to respect those two. Right
Hmm.
now, I will say that boundaries can be bent. Non-negotiables are non-negotiables. I know that we moved down here because
That
of a
again. Say that
non-negotiable,
again, brother. Say that again. I
right?
need brothers to hear that.
I was freestyling, so I don't remember what I said, but what I said, boundaries can be bent, and
Correct.
non-negotiables are non-negotiables,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
And
Because
and
sometimes you have to
and
correct your boundaries. Sometimes boundaries can extend. So, but
yeah,
non-negotiables.
and I think our boundaries are based on our experiences, right? So, I was talking to a friend of mine earlier today, and she had mentioned that people have a tendency of projecting what another person is feeling or what another person is doing to them, right?
Hmm.
And so, for
Hmm.
example, typically in a male female relationship, men are very sensitive. For women that don't already know, we are sensitive as heck, right? And
Exactly.
in times of us feeling vulnerable or feeling, let's say, inadequate at the moment, we will find an escape route, and
Hmm.
it's not because we want to hurt you, it's because we're preemptively trying to protect ourselves. But that's us projecting that you are ready to hurt us, right?
Correct.
And that is because we haven't, both parties haven't truly communicated about how they communicate, right? So, perfect example, if I'm going somewhere and I know that um, I don't know anybody in the room or I don't know anybody in the space, I'll more likely be probably a quiet, sit in a corner and observe. But people
Hmm.
will perceive me as being antisocial,
Okay.
right? People will feel like I'm being antisocial. One of the coolest things I ever heard in therapy, couples therapy, was when my therapist asked my wife, "Are your feelings factual?"
Okay.
Right? Now, correct, get me right here. Your feelings are your feelings. You are entitled to your feelings, but are they factual?
100%.
Because we
Correct.
could feel like someone is doing us dirty because of something that happened to us in the past, and that feeling may not be necessarily what's actually happening,
Correct.
right? And so by communicating our boundaries, by communicating our expectations, by definitely communicating our um, non-negotiables, we can kind of start to take the feeling out of the space and really
Hmm.
see the situation for what it is. How often in your past, not right now, but in your past, have you gotten into an argument over someone feeling some type of way?
Hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
Right? Because primarily because they felt what was a boundary was crossed.
It's
And that's why I
crossed.
said
Correct.
boundaries are meant to be bent. And to your point, boundaries can adjust because our boundaries are based on past experiences,
Correct.
right? You set a boundary based on, okay, in my past relationships used to X, Y, and Z, and A used to make me feel bad. So now I am putting this wall up because I don't want to feel that way.
Hmm.
But if you expressed why this wall exists, therefore the person that you're with or the person that you are communicating with gets a better idea of, oh, okay, so you have this boundary because of what you've experienced in the past. You
Correct.
know, traumas cause people to put up boundaries.
Hmm.
How many times you've known, perfect example, um, your accident, right? Now,
Hmm.
how much space do you now between yourself and everybody around you?
Exactly. That is a press and it's a push because I've learned from that, and that's the interesting thing. You have to be able to understand that. Exactly.
So, but yeah, so
So
that
even
that that to go ahead.
yeah. No, no, you're good.
No, I was gonna say that to me is kind of one of the areas where I'm like, we definitely need to, and part of my video, I'm not sure what's going on here, but part of the whole situation here is to kind of like make sure, like, um how do we continue to communicate what our boundaries are if we don't know what where they technically come from, you know?
Right. Well, that kind of stems from even when you're saying therapy, or I have to go back to this word you use, sensitivity. I have to be really careful about that because I would prefer a person to have some sensitivity, some sensitive, because otherwise you're walking around as a stone. You're not responding to anything. So my strong reaction to something comes from somewhere, and if that comes from a boundary, that is a point where I need to communicate that right now. Because we just said before, you have to speak assertively, you have to communicate it clearly. So if this is a new thing that's happening, relationships or friends, it's important to stop, to communicate at that time, well, this made me feel this way. And I think
Right.
society, from a male standpoint, we're taught that we're not supposed to be able to have any sensitivity. I disagree with it. I'll be Bobby Brown all day. I need to be able to express my sensitivity because if I don't, you're going to continually step over that thing that I'm sensitive about. And the only way I can
Mhm.
evaluate that is, one, I have to still ask myself, well, why did that bother me? And that may go to the past trauma that you just spoke of. Traumas go on for life. So that may be an unrecognized trauma that I need to identify and discuss. But you still have to be able to accept it, express it at that particular time so that either it doesn't happen. So when you say someone oversteps boundary, I think it's a continuum. If you continue to
Mm,
overstep that boundary, that's something different. If you overstepped it, I communicated it, we had a conversation about it, it's something I can bend on, then okay, let's change the boundary some. But if it's not, then that takes us back to that non-negotiable feel. It has to be non-negotiable because those boundaries have to be healthy in relationships to maintain the personal and social life. And people will cross boundaries, and I don't think it's always intentional. Now you have some people who, again, who have not been taught about sensitivity and has no sensitivities themselves. They were intentionally cross boundaries just to get a rise out of you. And that's when you got to be able to remove yourself from that situation, remove yourself from that person, whether it be parents, brothers, sisters, friends. You got to remove yourself because clearly they could care less about your sensitivity or about your boundary.
mm,
Whether that's, again, and when that happens, you got to either figure out yourself, seek support from your friends, your family, professionals, especially when they're not respected or become difficult to maintain. And a lot of us don't want
mm.
to lose those relationships. So guess what we do? We sit silently and let them cross our boundary. And
Yeah,
that's just that's not
and
cool.
I feel like a lot of people that I know, that's unfortunately been kind of like the downfall of their relationships, right? How
Hmm.
many people over a period of time, because they haven't communicated, or one side has just been trying to set boundaries and it's been broken time after time after time.
Yeah.
Now, off air, we talked about something real quick. Um, you know, just talking about how do we prepare the next generation to be able to communicate like this,
Yeah.
right? Like, teaching the youth today what we know now, so that
Yeah.
by the time they're our age, well, my age, but by the time that they're our age, they are a lot more um, coherent of
Yeah.
what their boundaries are, their non-negotiables are,
Hmm.
expectations. Because a lot of it starts with self, right? Like, what am I allowing myself to do?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the self-awareness piece. I think that's pretty crucial because a lot of us don't know ourselves. So when we can recognize those traumas that we just spoke about, when we talk about those things are non-negotiable, it can help foster that self-awareness. So for young people, I think again, we were talking offline about the 9-year-old who listened to something but yet gave it back. That's her understanding. Okay, what are the boundaries in this household, and that
Mm-hmm.
to how she can then regulate herself within the rules of that. But when you enable individuals to understand what their values are, what their beliefs are more deeply, then that gives that self awareness. And until you're self aware, people are going to constantly cross over you. That goes into some of even your decision making skills. As a child, we're taught to make some decisions, but parents and adults are quick to come in and slash those in two. So, having a clear even having that understanding of your life non-negotiables makes it easier for them to make that decision. And again, it's aligned based off of their personal value, their personal growth. And we have to teach young people that they are somebody, that they're important. When we talk about those affirmations, that goes into your non-negotiables because you know who you are. You know that you are a great person. You know that you're beautiful. You know that you're smart. You know that you are all those things. So nobody can come in and crash that party for you because you have that self awareness. You can make those decisions for yourself. And then coming back again to what we talk about all the time, the state of mind, that mental aspect, well being is everything. So with self awareness, that decision making skill that comes over to your overall well being and children to go to your question, I think a lot, at least I didn't, and it's not against my parents, but that comfortability to have that well-being, to be able to prioritize, those things that I thought were important, so that I can ensure that I can put the time and energy into those areas of my life that are most important, and that contributes completely to my overall well-being. So I think if we teach children that they have a voice, now don't be disrespectful with the voice. I mean, again, how I grew up, you were seen and not heard. I get it, I get it, but I was a kid that had a whole lot to ask and couldn't ask it, and I think that kind of retarded my growth in a lot of ways. It retarded my self awareness and my decision making. So those areas, they can contribute most to. I mean, your well-being is everything. So I think being open, allowing them to have some space for thought, teaching them who they are, teaching them what their values are, or to define those values for themselves. And as they continue to grow, you won't be as mentally constipated as we are now in that space of allowing people to step on us. And I love it when I see little children say no, beyond the 2-year-old, but at an age where, they're saying no, but then the next thing we do is we give that reason why. You gave an example for those that are listening. You had children at your house and you told them, electronic equipment is going down at a specific time. That next step is explaining to them why. And that way, going into this, there's a boundary in your household that children should not stay up a certain time of night.
Right.
And the part that negotiability comes into it when the question is asked. But sometimes you can avoid those questions by just giving the reason why and still leaving room. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think for children, just allowing them some space and thought and pouring back into them so they can be self-aware and they can make decisions adequately based off of their values, what their personal goals are, and that all affects their well-being. And I think that makes a better adult, a much better adult.
See, so and this brings me to the next stage, right? We are adults, but we're still children to our parents. How do you how do you set those
Yeah.
clear boundaries, expectations, and non-negotiables, right? So I remember,
Mhm.
and I'm guilty of not calling my mom often enough, and I
Right.
understand I need to call her more. But when she calls, she's so dramatic with the response. I'm like, Ma, you can't you can't respond like that. That's not cool. And it's the most guilt tripping response. But, I found it difficult to even fathom setting a boundary around that type of conversation because, as you said, like children are to be seen, not heard, and as we get older, our relationship with our parents change,
Yeah.
and the way we communicate also changes,
Mhm.
and so nothing crazy like calling each other out our names or nothing like that, but certain things that used to be done when I was a kid, like I'm not a kid anymore, but like I would prefer this to be said or this to be done. How does one go about adjusting these long-term relationships and setting these boundaries? As you mentioned, you're just now setting boundaries. And what was that transition from, all right, everything's negotiable to, all right, it's not all negotiable. I need my time to myself, or I need these things for me to be well.
Right, right. So again, communicating your needs and your expectations clearly and assertively. For me, I think because, growing up, in the country and in a very rural area, heavily church based, you respected your parents, you respected your elders. And I think for me, I never addressed the younger child and allowed myself to make that transition. Even though I'm in a adult body, I still had such reverence for my parents. And I also had my parents who, didn't really cross over a whole lot. They didn't really push their boundaries. They had their thoughts. They would give me their ideas, but they never truly pushed it. So for me, it was accepting that I'm now grown. They say, once a man, twice a child. So just accepting that I do have decisions and I do have boundaries and I do have expectations, it comes to just, I hate using the word man up, but just being strong enough in who I am to have those conversations when necessary. And luckily, I haven't had with my parents to really do it as much. They've been very supportive. And it's just, I wanted to be careful not to cross their boundaries. Like, for instance, in my home, it was a non alcohol home. So I was 51 years old before I brought a bottle of wine into my parents' house. And I was nervous about that because I didn't want to cross that boundary. But it wasn't an express boundary as an adult. That was something as a child. So, bringing
Mm.
it in, I had some left, and I found out later that one of my uncles had came and wanted to have the wine, and my bonus mom was like, "No, that's Mark wine." So it was a blessing because I just never thought to cross that boundary because I still saw myself kind of as a child in their home. And my dad was quick to say, "We've been waiting on you." You know, what I mean, it's time. That step up part. So um, I don't think I'm gonna answer that question good for you because I haven't had parents to really cross it. But for friends, for some fraternity brothers, for some professional colleagues, again, that's on another level. I needed to learn to draw that line. And the drawing the line isn't just, kind of agreeing and walking away and not doing it. It required me saying, well, this is why I'm not going to do that. Or this is why I'm not going to let you do that. And if it's something pretty egregious, just cutting it off right then and there, like, I'm gonna teach you how to treat me. You know what I mean? We got to teach people. It's just that simple. Um, yeah, it's the timing, and I really think hitting it right then and there, the example of the grill this weekend, had I kind of hemmed and hawed and kind of went up to the grill not, then I would have been caught in there. But there were certainly some young people that were there and were kind of prepared. And here's the other side too. I drew the line no, but I also made sure I had to turn my chair away from the grill because I did not like the way they were using that grill. So you get off. But when you say your boundary, you got to stick to it. And we didn't talk about that. But if you say no, say no. Can you
Mm,
revisit that? Yeah, but you think you can say no and then automatically say yes. If that's a no, it's a no. Take time to think about it, take time to evaluate it, and come back to it if necessary. So that would be my simple answer is it has to happen time. Communicate it effectively and assertively, and you don't want to disrespect your parents, but like, again, I don't know your mom's situation. It sounds like she loves you a lot and she's going to see this podcast probably. She's going to get to me. So maybe that's the answer. Share the podcast.
As we come close to it near the end, I wanted to talk about the benefits of setting expectations,
Yeah.
defining our non-negotiables, and how do they impact our mental health and our personal development.
Yeah, yeah. So from the personal development, because again, you can only be who you allow yourself to be, if you ask me that question. So being able to recognize those non-negotiables and being able to set boundaries, um, they're interconnected concepts. And we see how we've kind of gone back and forth. They're really interconnected. And so if you understand the core values, if you understand yourself, and what your priorities are, I think it'll help define itself because they're truly so interconnected. When you create those boundaries, you can protect your mental health, right? Fostering your personal growth. And if you have strong mental health, good personal growth, then that's going to cross over into, I think, every other part of your life, professionally, socially, again, in your marriage and as well in your relationships, because those boundaries are going to give you a balance. Again, the boundary and your non-negotiables are interconnected. And if they are, then you're going to be able to maintain that balance in your life for your just overall well-being. But for the personal growth, again, stress management, managing self-esteem, creating healthy relationships, work-life balance, all that comes from that interconnectivity. So I think that's where that personal growth will come from because you're not allowing anyone else to negotiate your growth. You get to negotiate.
Mm,
You get to have agency within yourself. And so I think the overall quality of life is affected when you have these non-negotiables. And even if it's just one thing, and that's why put that on there. It might be more than one thing, but if you have those intact, you get to nurture your overall growth, and personal growth is everything. Absolutely everything.
okay, okay.
Absolutely.
Now, leave us with the final note or final message
Ah,
around the subject.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So again, life non-negotiables, the values, the beliefs, the practices are all essential to your personal growth, your well-being, and your happiness. And I'm not sure about you, but I love being happy now. I love having a strong well-being. So for me, I had to create those. And at my age now, I am 54, and I know that's an OG standard, and I'm appreciating that. But part of that is being able to maintain these relationships by being able to set the boundaries. So finding those things. If you don't have a hobby, you got to have a hobby. Your regular exercise, balanced diet that we talked about, setting aside time for quality time. Because if you don't do it for yourself, at some point you're going to be stuck because people are going to take advantage of you. And they may not be doing it intentionally, but if you are available, why not? So you can't
Mm,
be available for all people all the time if you're not available for yourself. You cannot be available for all people all the time if you're not available for yourself, because you are it. We always remind each other of putting that mask on first in the airplane. Take care of yourself. So that's, I got to leave you with that. Your non-negotiables are non-negotiable. And coining your term, boundaries can be changed, but it still should come with discussion. Still should come with a focus on that. So that's what I'll leave you
Right.
with. You got to protect your mind. You got to protect your health. You got to protect your mental and physical space. And that comes from what I would call health enhancing habits. With non-negotiables and boundaries.
Okay. Okay.
How
Listen,
about how are you doing it though?
you know what? Honestly, um, you know, one of the things that Dr. Mark has been helping me out with lately is really owning my truth, really living in the moment, taking this moment to breathe.
Yes,
One of the first things that Dr. Mark did in contributing to the community was providing breath work. Take some time out to,
got to do it.
I joined this group called Accountability Brother. Every month they have a hike.
Okay.
And in that hike, they remind us to take 30 minutes for ourselves.
Yeah.
30 minutes, whether it's in the morning, at night, in the evening, wherever, take those 30 minutes to thank God, Allah, Jehovah, whomever you guys, worship. Um, Take time to meditate, take time to be mindful, take time to just be in the moment. Because outside of those 30 days, the world is coming at you 100 miles an hour. And if in this world where we can only control but so much, that one thing that
Mhm.
will allow you to be able to be mentally well, just take those 30 minutes.
Yeah.
You ain't got to do 30 miles like Dr. Mark, or you ain't got to
Pray
do
for
a
it.
3 times a week workout, 4 times a week workout like myself. Take 30 minutes,
Yeah.
And last but not least, brothers, give yourself some grace. Give yourself some grace. This world is beating down on us more than necessary. Give yourself
Yep.
some grace. We're allowed to fall and pick ourselves back up and fall down again. But every fail forward is a lesson learned, right?
Progress.
So, with that being said, my brothers, my sisters, everybody out there, this was another great episode. And as
Yes.
always, stay safe. Peace.